So, Spider-Man 2 came out in 2004, and it's widely considered one of the best Spider-Man movies and one of the best superhero movies of all time. I mean, the movie is perfect. I'm not gonna lie to you. It's one of my all-time favorite films. I mean, it just really got Spider-Man, and it really got the conflict of a superhero right, which is not something that every superhero movie does, especially not anymore. And I would say it's one of the first superhero movies that honestly had a really well written story. But what if I told you that the Spider-Man 2 we got in 2004 initially looked very different? And, I'm sure we've all heard the rumors of Black Cat being in the movie, which she was. She was going to be in the film at one point. And that's actually how I found out about this other version of the movie. But basically, David Koepp wrote the script for the first Spider-Man film in 2002. And that movie was a successful hit. And almost right after the movie came out, Sony put him to work, hey, write us in our draft. And around July of 2002, again, just after the movie came out, around that time, he wrote his first draft for Spider-Man 2. His version of Spider-Man 2 was actually titled The Amazing Spider-Man. I'm not sure if it would have been released as The Amazing Spider-Man or if it would have been Spider-Man 2, The Amazing Spider-Man, or something like that. But that's just what the first draft of the script is titled. Now, he put out a couple different drafts, if I'm not mistaken, but the one I'm talking about here is primarily the first draft. And I must say, I was surprised at how different this actually was from the Spider-Man 2 that we got, because it's almost a different movie entirely. I mean, the core is the same. Peter Parker's losing his powers, and he must fight Dr. Octopus. But the truth of the matter is, the overall story is almost completely different. And there's actually some things I like in this draft more than I like about the actual first movie, which is kind of weird, or the second movie, the actual movie that we got. But I'm going to go over it a little bit. So basically, this movie is actually incredibly similar to the Amazing Spider-Man movie of 2012. The plot basically is Peter Parker wanting to know more about his parents, which is kind of interesting because that's not something that they ever really addressed in the Raimi movies that much. And then eventually he finds out that his parents were murdered, and he goes to see somebody, who worked with his parents. Obviously, like in the Amazing Spider-Man, that was the Lizard, but in this version, it's Doc Ock, and it turns out Doc Ock is actually evil, and he's the one who killed Peter's parents. There's also a little bit more of a backstory to the spider that actually bit Peter in the first film, and it said that the DNA in those spiders, the DNA that they were enhanced with, it didn't kill them, but after time their abilities encroded and just went away or whatever. So that's why Peter's losing his powers in this version of the movie. Also in the movie is Gwen Stacy. She actually appears in Spider-Man 3, and I'm not sure if they would have gotten the same actress because it almost seems like a completely different character, but her and Peter have a relationship in this movie, and I would say Peter spends most of his time romantically with her as opposed to Mary Jane, though Mary Jane is still in the film, and her and Peter are friends, and I'm going to be honest, I like their dynamic in this movie. Like, I feel like ultimately they would have wound up together in this trilogy, but I like that they actually wrote them off as friends here because it kind of makes them actually feel like friends. The trilogy always mentions Peter, MJ, and Harry as friends, but to be honest, I never really felt like they were the best of friends. But in this, I actually do feel like Peter and MJ are friends. They have a couple moments where they're riding a bus together, or when they're watching Peter's home movies on his birthday or whatever. It's just, really interesting stuff to see, and it's more things that I like because I feel it adds a little bit more characterization. Eddie Brock is in the script, but it's a brief cameo, and it references his reference in the first Spider-Man movie. And also something I thought was really cool is with Dr. Connors, there's a scene with him because, he's in this movie as well, and they reference that Peter was his lab assistant in the first movie. That's something I really like about this film because it carries over a lot of the things from the first movie. Not that the actual Spider-Man 2 didn't do that, I just feel there's a lot of references and such to the first film. Like, for instance, there's a scene where Spider-Man fights a carjacker, and he fights him pretty aggressively because obviously Spider-Man hates carjackers. And the police are chasing Spider-Man in this film. Captain Stacy is leading the hunt, again, similar to the Amazing Spider-Man movies, and he actually dies, just like in the Amazing Spider-Man. And it's kind of interesting, too, because, again, like in the first movie, the police were kind of chasing him, and then he saves the lady in the burning building or whatever, or the kid in the burning building, and they don't really really ever follow up past that. It's like the police are cool with Spider-Man, which, to be honest, in real life, the world would probably not be cool with a superhero like that. But anyways, Yeah, so it is interesting to see Spider-Man kind of being chased by the police, and I'm kind of skipping ahead here too. I'm kind of going all over the place, but at one point in the movie, there's this scene, and I highly recommend you read this script because it was a fantastic read. I want to say that David Koepp really did a good job writing this script, in my opinion. But there's this really cool scene where Harry Osborn and Jonah Jameson kind of team up, and Harry offers a reward for Spider-Man. And I mean, all I could think when I read this scene was like, wow, how cool would that have been to see J.K. Simmons and James Franco share a scene together? Because I don't think they ever had one scene together in the original trilogy. Like, I might be wrong. Am I wrong about that? If I'm wrong about that, I'm sure people will let me know. But yeah, I don't think they ever really had a scene together. And so that would have been pretty cool, in my opinion, if they had a scene together. And Doc Ock, he's pretty menacing. He's like an enemy of the state in this one. He sells U.S. secrets and stuff like that. So he's not a bad guy, but he has this one scene when he throws Peter Parker onto a train track because he doesn't know Peter Spider-Man. He's like, oh, this will get rid of him. But he says, like, in my opinion, what has to be the best line in all of cinema that I really wish we could have heard. He's like, how touching, a family reunion. Like, I mean, seriously, that's just great. I love that. But yeah, and he's pretty much a straight up bad guy in this one. There is a scene where him and Harry kind of team up like in the actual Spider-Man 2, and he's like, hey, help me, Harry, and Harry reveals that it's a trap and that he's basically setting him up, and then like a bunch of government agents and stuff come in because, you know, again, Doc Ock, he's supposed to have sold government secrets or something. It's a little bit over the place, and I'll be honest, even though it was nice again to see Harry actually do something aside from, you know, just being a side character, it was nice to actually see him have his own little mission. But to be honest, it kind of felt a little all over the place. That'd be the one thing in the script I don't like. And also the way Harry kind of figures out Peter's Spider-Man is a little bit different too. And, you know, again, I kind of feel like I'm going all over the place here, but towards the final act of the movie, that's where things kind of get really intense for Spider-Man. And on one hand, I kind of like this because it dials back to what we saw in the first movie, but in some regards, it kind of repeats itself a little bit here. So when Captain Stacy dies, basically Spider-Man and Doc Ock are having this big fight in downtown New York, and basically Captain Stacy gets caught in the crossfire. I think he dies just like his comic book death where he's saving that kid or whatever. But yeah, he dies, and the city of New York believes Spider-Man to be responsible for his death, so everyone's hating Spider-Man. Jameson runs a story about Peter being a cop killer, and this causes a bit of a conflict between Peter and Jameson. They have a little bit of an argument, which I thought was kind of neat, because, you know, Peter just really took everything from Jameson, so it would have been kind of interesting to see him stand up to him a little bit in the movies. But again, obviously, that did not go that route, but that would have been interesting, and, you know, it's pretty much all of New York turning on Spider-Man again, like they did kind of in the first movie. You know, I can't remember, but there's a certain point where everybody's kind of liking Spider-Man, and then later on in the film, you know, everyone just kind of disliking him, and then by the end of the movie, the New Yorkers team up and save Spider-Man. You know, the whole point of the movie, from the Goblin's point of view, is basically they'll all hate you eventually. So it kind of reckons back to that, but at the same time, it almost kind of feels like, you know, we already did this, so I can see why they didn't go that particular route, because it does kind of feel like we're treading over the same material. However, at the same time, it does also kind of make it feel like a closer knit sequel, because there's so many references to the previous work, and there's so many callbacks to it in the film. And now for the grand finale of the movie. And also, Peter does also get fed up in this version and eventually quits being Spider-Man after trying to save a woman, and then her just freaking out about it, so he ends up burning the suit, throwing the suit in a barrel and burning it. So we do get that little homage to Spider-Man No More, too. One thing I really find kind of silly is the cure to fix Spider-Man is just really changing up his diets. That's something Dr. Connors says, like, oh, if we had just changed up the diets of the spiders, it probably would have prevented them from losing their abilities. That's just something I want to throw out there real quick. And, so, Harry meets a girl named Stephanie in the movie and decides to marry her and have this kind of like fake wedding or whatever, because at this point he knows Peter's Spider-Man. He's trying to get back at him and MJ, and it's just kind of a weird subplot. Like, I'll be honest, I kind of don't feel like the movie needed this part. This is one of the things I would have changed about the film, though I do think the conversations between Harry and Norman, because the Norman saying is here, where he hears Norman's voice, and I think that was very well done. But yeah, so basically Doc Ock comes up because, you know, Harry still has the image refractor, which is a device created by Mary and Richard Parker earlier in the movie. And it's the device that Doc Ock needs that Harry has. And this causes Peter to end up becoming Spider-Man again. They have a fight. It lasts a little bit up there. Then it also moves on to a train. And then they have a final fight on top of another building, which involves police helicopters and another foreign helicopter. Again, I recommend you read this in detail because it's a quite interesting script. And ultimately, Spider-Man ends up beating Doc Ock. At one point, Doc Ock even says he is inedible. Like, I kid you not. That's actually in the script. And, you know, that doesn't end well for him. He ends up getting beat, and, you know, he's like, don't kill me, and Spider-Man's like, nah, I'm not going to kill you, and he sends him to prison, which is kind of interesting, because in most of the Spider-Man movies, like, all of his enemies almost always die, so that's kind of interesting. But yeah, Doc Ock goes to prison at the end of this film, and then at the end, Mary Jane's like, I love you, Peter, still, and Peter's like, I love you still, but I'm gonna go date Gwen. And the movie kind of ends with him going with her, and then ultimately he gives his final speech about how he's still Spider-Man, and I don't know, I mean, I'm really oversimplifying it. Like, obviously there's more to it in the script. It probably sounds a little silly the way I'm wording all this, but to be honest, I really did enjoy some aspects of this script, or this draft, I'll say. There's things about this I actually like a little bit more than Spider-Man 2, like some of the particular references, and like I mentioned, that J.K. Simmons, James Franco scene. However, that being said, I do think the Spider-Man 2 that we ultimately got was a far better movie, and I think it would have been better had this one came out. I think we got the best version of Spider-Man 2. But I do think it's interesting because nobody hardly ever talks about this draft. And what's so weird to me is how similar this movie is to the Amazing Spider-Man franchise. I've been talking for a long time here. Let's see, I've been talking for about 12 minutes. I don't like to make super long videos, so I'm going to try to wrap this up with just a timeline of the movie, just because I've been a little all over the place. So basically, movie starts out, Peter, birthday, he wants to know more about his parents. This involves Peter to find Doc Ock, who worked with his parents and actually killed his parents. This involves a fight between Peter and Doc Ock. At some point, Peter is going back to college, and he's learning from Dr. Connors, who helped out with the spider experiment that gave him his abilities in the first place. He's learning from him more about the spiders. Here he meets Gwen Stacy and forms a romantic relationship with her. At the same time, he's still seeing Harry and MJ, their friends, and he's also being chased by Captain Stacy. At some point, Spider-Man goes back to fight Doc Ock and ultimately defeats him, or so he thinks, and then this causes where Spider-Man first learns about him kind of losing his abilities. So again, he kind of goes back to Dr. Connors on that, and then later in the film, Doc Ock attacks downtown New York. You know, he's trying to get the image refractor, and this involves him fighting into the daylight from Harry. This is when the government had came in. So this is when him and Spider-Man fight in the daytime. This is when Captain Stacy dies, and everyone thinks Spider-Man killed him. Later on in the movie, which is kind of really directly onto this, Peter, you know, he's at Gwen's house. He's consoling her and her family, and then, you know, he tries to save the woman. She ultimately is like, hey, don't touch me, you're a cop killer, something like that. She's being mugged. And then Spider-Man gets upset. He hates how everybody feels, how negative everyone is towards him, so he burns the suit, gets rid of it. Harry figures out that Peter is Spider-Man. He plans a fake wedding. Doc Ock attacks it. Spider-Man beats Doc Ock. MJ and Peter confess their love for each other, but Peter still decides it's going to be a Gwen, and then the movie ends with him on the Empire State Building about to swing off or whatever, and he actually ends saying that he is Spider-Man. So, again, that is a quick overview of this draft, but I highly recommend that if you're curious about this, that you go read this, because this truly was a really interesting story. And one of my favorite things was just learning about Peter's parents, because they're not really mentioned in any of the other movies. I feel this has good continuity with the first film. Again, I'm happier with the Spider-Man 2 we got, but I think this is a really interesting draft, and it's on David Koepp's website. It's, you know, this is just the first draft. I'm not sure how different the other drafts of this movie are, because he's got other drafts listed there. But yeah, this is a really interesting draft, and I feel like nobody talks about this, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe like 6,000 people have talked about this, and if they have, I apologize for bringing it up. I mean, in all the Spider-Man groups that I'm in, and all the discussions I've seen, I've only seen like one post on this, and it only mentioned like Eddie and Gwen being in the movie, and like Eddie and Gwen are in the movie, but like Eddie's role is like super small in the movie, and Gwen's obviously is bigger, but I feel like there's so much more to this movie, or what would have been this movie, than people talk about. But yes, thank you for watching, and have a nice day.